The first thing my brother did after the principal placed the envelope in my hand was laugh, lift it over his head, and throw my full scholarship letter into the river while people were still clapping. My name is Talia Reyes, and at 18, I was standing on the public dock behind Westmere High in a white graduation dress I had borrowed from a neighbor because my mother said buying one for a ceremony that changes nothing would be wasteful. The river behind me was bright with late May sun. Parents held paper cups of lemonade. Teachers stood near folding chairs. My counselor was smiling with both hands clasped in front of her chest because she had spent 2 years helping me apply to a nursing program I could not have touched without that scholarship. Then my brother Beckett stepped forward before I could even break the seal. He took the envelope right out of my hand. People laughed at first because they thought he was joking. Beckett was 22, broad-shouldered, loud. The kind of son people forgave before he opened his mouth. He looked at the college crest, whistled, and said, "Look at that. Little Miss Escape Plan actually did it." I reached for it once. Only once. He moved it out of reach, grinning for the audience. And my mother, Celeste, gave the small warning smile she used when she wanted me to behave in public. Not him. Me. "Beckett," Principal Duval said, half laughing. "Give that back." But Beckett had already unfolded the letter. He skimmed it with exaggerated seriousness, then read the most important line aloud in a voice meant for a stage. Full tuition, housing stipend, academic honors placement. There were cheers around us. Someone behind me said, "Oh my God." My counselor made a sound like relief leaving her body. For 1 second, the day belonged to me. Then Beckett looked at my father, and my father looked back without surprise. That was the part I understood years later. Not the throw. The look before it. My father, Ronan Reyes, did not rise from his chair. He did not tell his son to stop. He took a slow sip from his drink and watched Beckett hold my future between 2 fingers. "You really gonna leave Mom with the bills?" Beckett asked, still smiling. "After everything?" The laughter around us faltered. My counselor's smile disappeared first. Mrs. Weller from the church lowered her phone. Principal Duval took a step forward. But public scenes have a strange gravity. People do not move at once when a family crosses a line. They wait to see whether it really happened. I heard myself say very evenly, "Give it back." Beckett tilted his head. "Why? So you can run off and pretend you're better than us?" "I should tell you," I cried. "That would be the easier version. A girl in a white dress, on a dock, watching her brother ruin the one clean thing she had earned." But I did not cry. My throat closed. My hands went cold. I stood still enough for people to mistake me for composed. Then Beckett turned toward the river and let the letter go. It did not drift slowly the way paper does in movies. It caught the wind, slapped once against a dock post, then hit the water and folded into itself. I watched the college seal darken and vanish beneath the surface. Several people gasped. One of the teachers said, "Jesus Christ." My counselor moved first, heels striking wood as she rushed toward the edge, as if she could still catch ink after water touched it. I stepped past her, bent down, and looked into the current. White paper flashed once under the ripples, then slid away under brown-green water carrying pollen, leaves, and somebody's crushed soda cup from farther upstream. Everything cheap floated. The one thing I had worked for sank. Behind me, my mother said the sentence that split my life in two. Maybe this is for the best. No one spoke for a beat after that. Silence is louder when it comes from witnesses. I turned around slowly. My mother was standing now, one hand on the strap of her purse, the other pressed flat against her collarbone as if she were the one under strain. My father stayed seated. Beckett shoved his hands into his pockets and rocked back on his heels, pleased with himself now that the worst had already happened. His friends by the railing were no longer smiling. One of them looked away. Principal Duval found his voice first. "Mrs. Reyes, that document can be reissued, but this is unacceptable." "It was a letter," my father said. "Not the money itself." My counselor stared at him. "It was proof of admission and scholarship terms. It mattered. It matters if she goes." my mother replied. And we have not agreed to that. That landed harder than the throw. Not agreed. As if my acceptance belonged to family vote. As if the grades were communal property. As if 4 years of study at the kitchen table between part-time shifts, tutoring work, and nights helping my aunt after her surgery had only produced something provisional, something still theirs to approve. The river moved behind me with its ordinary sound. A boat passed in the distance. Somewhere beyond the dock, graduates were taking photos beside the banner with gold letters spelling "Congratulations Class of 20" because the last number had folded in the breeze. Life kept going with offensive efficiency. My counselor came to stand beside me. "Talia," she said quietly, "we can contact the school this afternoon. This is not over." Beckett gave a short laugh. "It is if she's not going." I looked at him then. Really looked. He was not drunk. He was not impulsive. His shirt was tucked in for once. He had shown up early to an event he usually mocked. And my father still had that mild expression men wear when they want cruelty to pass for practicality. The three of them had known. That realization did not explode inside me. It settled. Heavy. Exact. My mother stepped closer and lowered her voice, which was somehow worse than yelling. "Do not embarrass us further. We'll discuss it at home." There it was again. The command was not aimed at the son who had thrown away my scholarship letter in front of the entire graduating class. It was aimed at the daughter expected to absorb it quietly. Around us, people began doing what crowds do when shame becomes too intimate. They looked at their shoes. They picked up bags. They pretended to speak to their children. But they had heard enough. They knew who had crossed the line, and they knew who was being asked to tidy it. I smoothed the front of my dress because my hands needed work. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Did you know he was going to do that?" My mother did not answer. My father looked past me to the river. Beckett shrugged. That was answer enough. I nodded once. Not dramatically. Just once. Like a person confirming an address she had been hoping was wrong. Then I stepped away from my family, walked to the far end of the dock, and took off the cheap white shoes that were already blistering my heels. The boards were hot under my bare feet. My graduation tassel tapped softly against my shoulder in the wind. Behind me, I could hear Principal Duval arguing with my parents in a voice she was trying and failing to keep professional. I did not turn back. Across the river, the college town I had imagined for 2 years was not visible from that dock. But the river itself was deep, moving, indifferent. It had taken the letter, not the record. Not the grades. Not the offer. Not my name. At 18, I did not yet know how expensive families can make your freedom. I only knew, standing there with wet light flickering across the water, that whatever came next would not be a misunderstanding. It would be a decision. And 6 years later, when my brother used that same river in a speech about loyalty, he would finally learn what had actually sunk that afternoon. I did not go home with them after graduation. While my parents were still arguing with Principal Duval on the dock, I walked to the parking lot carrying my shoes in one hand and the empty scholarship folder in the other. My counselor, Nadine Mercer, caught up with me before I reached the road and told me to get in her car. I did. She drove me to her office and called the nursing school immediately. The letter could be reissued. That part was not the real damage. The real problem surfaced when she asked the admissions office to check my portal activity. 3 messages had already been opened over the previous 10 days: housing instructions, a required confirmation form, and an urgent follow-up notice. None of them had been completed. I logged in from her desk and saw the same thing on the screen. My admission was still active. My full scholarship was still listed. But the messages had been opened and left unanswered. I felt the truth settle before I said it aloud. "My mother uses my laptop for bills," I said. Nadine did not rush to fill the silence. She just turned the monitor slightly toward me and let me see the timestamps again. Someone in my house had read those messages. Someone had known exactly what steps would secure my place and had let those steps expire. That was the first sign the sabotage had started long before Beckett touched the letter. We changed every password in the office. Email, applicant portal, financial aid. Then Nadine asked where I could sleep if I did not want to go home. I called my Aunt Inez. She told me to come over immediately. On the drive there, my phone kept lighting up with calls from my mother and father. Beckett called once. I ignored all of them. My aunt opened the door before I knocked. She reheated leftover rice and beans, poured me a glass of water, and let me sit at her kitchen table without asking me to explain everything at once. Nothing dramatic happened in that room. That was why it mattered. A plate set down quietly. A chair pulled out for me. Food made for my body, not my usefulness. Then my mother called again, and this time I answered. She did not ask if I was all right. She said I had humiliated the family by leaving. I asked one question. Did you open my portal messages? She paused, then said, we needed to understand what you were planning. Not denial. Confirmation. I asked if my father knew. She said yes. I asked about Beckett. She said he was upset, and that the family needed me close, practical, and loyal. Not at a distant college. Not in a life they could not direct. That was the moment the whole thing became clear. Beckett had made a public spectacle of it, but the real betrayal had happened quietly at home, days earlier, on my own computer, under my parents' roof. Before she could turn it into another lecture, I said, I'm not coming home tonight. She hung up. Later that evening, I checked the portal again from my aunt's kitchen table. One narrow opening remained. The scholarship was still secure. Housing was almost gone, but not closed. Orientation placement could still be restored if I submitted formal documentation of interference by 9 the next morning. That was when I understood something important. What they had done was cruel, but it was also organized, and anything organized could eventually be proven. By 8:30 the next morning, I had proof that what happened on the dock was not a family argument that got out of hand. It was a coordinated decision. Nadine met me at the school before her office officially opened. She had already printed the admissions timeline, the portal activity log, and the deadline notes from the nursing program. The open messages were still there, marked with exact timestamps. One had been accessed at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, while I was covering the front register at Harlow's Pharmacy. Another had been opened just after 6:00 a.m. on a Thursday, when I was on the early bus to my hospital volunteer shift. The third had been read on Sunday night while I was at church with Aunt Inez. I could account for every minute of those windows because my life at 18 was built around schedules I could not afford to miss. Nadine did not say, "This is enough." She said, "Let's build it properly." That difference mattered. She had me log into my email and search every message from the college. The scholarship offer was there. The follow-up notices were there. So was something else. 2 emails I had never seen because they had already been moved into trash and deleted from the inbox. One was the reminder about the housing selection deadline. The other included the instructions for submitting the deposit waiver acknowledgement. Both had been opened first. I stared at the screen. I didn't delete these. I know, Nadine said. The school district's tech coordinator was already in the building by then, and Nadine brought him in without ceremony. He checked the desktop sync history on my school email account because I had used the same laptop for some scholarship forms during senior year. He could not trace a person with certainty from that alone, but he could confirm something specific. The messages had been accessed from my home IP address. Not from school, not from the library, not from the pharmacy. My home. Not a guess, not a feeling, a location. That was the first proof. The second came before noon. Aunt Inez drove me back to the house because I needed clothes, my nursing textbooks, and the folder where I kept every document that mattered. Nadine had told me not to go alone. She did not need to explain why. The house looked the same as it always had. My father's truck in the driveway. My mother's wind chime near the porch. Beckett's boots by the door, left where someone else would trip over them. Families can commit quiet violence in rooms that still smell like coffee. My mother opened the door before we knocked twice. Her eyes went first to Aunt Inez, then to the legal-size envelope in my hand. And I watched caution replace irritation. "You brought your aunt now?" she said. Really? I came for my things. You came to make a scene. No, Auntie Inez said mildly, stepping past her into the hall. The scene was yesterday. My mother hated being answered in the same calm tone she used on other people. She moved aside, but not graciously. My father was at the kitchen table with the local paper open and unread in front of him. Beckett was leaning against the counter, eating toast like he lived in a world where hunger was the only urgent thing in the room. He looked at the envelope in my hand and smirked. You getting lawyers now? Not yet, I said. That made him laugh once. But he stopped when I walked straight past him toward the small desk near the laundry room. That desk was where my mother paid bills, stored warranty slips, and kept the household mail sorter. It was also where my laptop usually sat when I wasn't using it. It was there now. Closed. Plugged in. Moved half an inch farther back than I normally kept it. I opened it. My mother stepped forward. You don't need to go through that right now. I looked at her. I do. The browser history had already been cleared. That did not surprise me. But people who believe family gives them immunity are rarely as careful as they think. She had forgotten the downloads folder. Inside it were 2 PDF files from the nursing school portal, both saved the week before graduation. One was titled Housing, Selection, Guide. The other was Enrollment, Waiver, Confirmation. My mother went still. Beckett stopped chewing. That was the second proof. I clicked one file open. My scholarship number appeared at the top beside my full legal name. The timestamp showed it had been downloaded to the laptop 4 days before the ceremony. You said you only wanted to understand what I was planning, I said. My mother folded her arms. I needed to see what kind of commitment they were forcing on you. They weren't forcing anything. My father finally spoke. This dramatic language is pointless. We reviewed options. Parents do that. Parents don't delete their daughters' college notices. His expression barely changed, which was somehow worse than anger. You are still living in this house. That means decisions affecting this house involve us. There it was again. Not support. Control disguised as responsibility. I opened the recycle bin next. One folder had been permanently deleted, but another file remained because someone had restored it and forgotten to remove it again. It was a screenshot. Just a screenshot, yet it changed the room. It showed my admissions portal open to the housing page with a highlighted line. If no action is taken by deadline, placement may be forfeited. The cursor was visible in the corner. So was the bottom right date stamp from the laptop. 3 days before graduation. Beckett pushed off the counter. So what? Mom checked your school page? Big deal. That sentence landed harder than he realized. Not if. Not maybe. He knew. I turned to him. How did you know she checked it? He opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother answered too fast. Because we discussed it as a family. Aunt Inez gave a short, humorless breath. No. You discussed it as a strategy. No one contradicted her. That was the third proof. And it was the cleanest one yet. Not a document, but alignment. The kind families reveal when they stop improvising and start defending the same lie in the same words. I went to my room and packed in 15 minutes. Scrubs from my volunteer program. 2 pairs of jeans. My notebooks. My folder of transcripts. Vaccine records. Recommendation letters. And tax forms. At the back of my closet, inside an old shoebox, I found the money I had saved from weekend shifts at the pharmacy. $380 in 10s and 20s. Still wrapped in a rubber band. I slipped it into my bag. When I came back down, my father was standing now. If you walk out over this, he said, don't expect us to fund your mistakes. The sentence would have frightened me the day before. That morning it only clarified his position. He was not losing a daughter. He was losing access. I wasn't expecting you to fund anything, I said. My mother's face changed then, not into remorse, but into something colder. Calculation under pressure. You're making yourself look ungrateful, she said. After everything we've done. I looked at the laptop still open on the desk, at the downloaded forms with my name on them. At my brother standing in the kitchen, where he had probably heard them discuss how to keep me home, and I understood the moral line they had crossed was not simply sabotage. It was possession. They believed my future belonged to the family until they decided otherwise. I shifted my bag higher on my shoulder. Then Beckett made the mistake that would matter 6 years later. He said, "You wouldn't have left anyway." Not loudly, not theatrically, just with the easy confidence of someone repeating an assumption already shared in private. I turned back. "Why do you think that?" He shrugged. "Because Dad said once the housing was gone, you'd fold." The kitchen became very quiet. My father's head snapped toward him. My mother actually reached for the edge of the table, as if balance had become relevant. Beckett looked from one face to another and realized too late that he had pulled the private conversation into the open. Not the whole plan, just enough of it. Enough. I did not raise my voice. I did not call him a liar. I did not need to. The room had already changed shape around his sentence. Dad said, "Once the housing was gone, you'd fold." That was no longer hurt. No longer suspicion. No longer inference built from email logs and deleted notices. It was deliberate betrayal, confirmed by the one person too arrogant to understand the value of silence. I walked out with Aunt Inez beside me and my bag cutting into my shoulder. Behind us, my mother called my name once, using the soft tone she saved for moments when force had failed and image still mattered. I did not turn around. In the car, Aunt Inez started the engine and handed me a folded receipt from the console so I could write down every detail while it was still exact. The downloads. The screenshot. Beckett's words. My father's threat. Time strips memory clean if you let it. Evidence needs to be fixed before grief blurs it. So I wrote. And by the time we pulled out of the driveway, the story my family told about protecting me had already begun to collapse under its own record. By the end of that week, I understood something I had not been old enough to name before. Family control becomes stronger when it is built into paperwork. Until then, I had been thinking in emotional terms. Betrayal, humiliation, sabotage. But Nadine did not let me stay there. She helped me move the entire situation into structure. On Monday morning, we sent the nursing school a formal statement with the portal logs, the email recovery record, and a written account of what happened on the dock. Principal Duval added her own letter on school letterhead. She did not dramatize it. She simply confirmed that my scholarship letter had been taken from my hand during a public school event, destroyed in front of witnesses, and followed by open opposition from my parents regarding my enrollment. That plain language helped more than outrage would have. By noon, the admissions office responded. My scholarship would remain intact. My honors placement would remain intact. Housing, however, was no longer guaranteed. Too many rooms had already been assigned. They could place me on a waiting list, but there was no promise it would clear before orientation. That was the first time I saw the real architecture of what my parents had done. Tuition was not the point. They knew full tuition would make me look impressive, but it would not get me out of their house by itself. Housing was the bridge. Housing meant physical departure, daily independence, a mailing address they could not monitor, a routine they could not interrupt, and distance from the family business my father had been slowly pulling Beckett into while calling it responsibility. If housing failed, I would still have the scholarship, but not the clean escape route. I would have to choose between impossible commuting costs, unstable short-term arrangements, or staying under their roof while pretending not to understand what that would do to me. They had not tried to destroy the opportunity completely. They had tried to make it unlivable. That distinction mattered because it made the sabotage look practical, even reasonable, to anyone who did not examine it closely. A daughter can still attend, technically. A family can still say they never stopped her. A father can still insist he only raised concerns. But systems reveal motive better than voices do. The interference had targeted the one part of the offer that turned admission into actual freedom. Nadine walked me through the costs with a yellow legal pad between us. Bus fares, temporary housing, uniform deposits, meal plans, clinical shoes, textbooks, license exam prep. Down the line, for the first time the dream stopped being abstract and became columns of numbers. I should have felt discouraged. Instead, I felt steadier. Numbers are cold, but they are honest. Aunt Inez sat with us at her kitchen table that evening while Nadine spoke over speakerphone. The table was too small for all the papers. My transcript rested beside a bowl of limes. My financial aid summary partly covered a supermarket flyer. That mix of ordinary and life-changing felt more real than any graduation ceremony had. "We solve what is structural first," Nadine said. "Emotion can wait." So we did. The nursing school had one possible option left: an emergency commuter adjustment plus a deferred housing request, if I could show immediate local lodging and stable transportation for the first term. Not ideal, not generous, but enough to keep my place alive. That was when Aunt Inez said, without looking up from the calculator in her hand, "She can stay here." I turned to her. "I can't ask you that." "You didn't," she said. "I offered. It's a small place. Then we'll use it efficiently. I'll be here for months. Then we'll buy another shelf." Nothing dramatic, no speech. Just one woman moving a problem from impossible to logistical. I still remember the details of the next hour more clearly than the shouting on the dock. My aunt pulling open the hall closet to measure where a plastic drawer unit could fit. Nadine reminding me to update my mailing address with the school before my parents could intercept anything else. The sound of a pen tapping the edge of a mug while we listed which expenses had to be paid first and which could be delayed. A life being rebuilt through sequence. That night, I opened my banking app and saw another piece of the structure. My checking account balance was lower than it should have been. At first, I thought I had misremembered. Then I pulled up the history. 2 cash withdrawals, both small enough to avoid immediate panic, had been made over the past month. $40, $60. Not devastating, but not mine. My mother had opened that student account with me when I was 16, because the local branch required an adult cosigner. I had forgotten her name was still attached. I checked the account details twice. Joint access. My breath slowed instead of quickening. That was the strange part of betrayal once it repeated often enough. You stopped expecting shock and started looking for pattern. The withdrawals were not the real damage. The structure was. Email access. Portal interference. Joint bank control. Shared devices. A home address tied to every important institution. My father's tax filings used in financial aid forms. My mother positioned between me and every official envelope. None of it had seemed abusive while I was inside it, because families call dependency normal when they benefit from it. Now, from the outside, I could finally see the whole system. They had not simply raised me. They had built access points. The next morning, Nadine sent me to a legal aid clinic connected to the County Family Services office. I was not suing anyone. Not yet. But I needed to know what could be separated quickly and what required formal process. The attorney there was a lean, soft-spoken woman named Corinne Vale, and I knew within 5 minutes that she was used to people arriving at her desk with stories they were embarrassed to tell. Because the harm had not left bruises. She asked precise questions. Who had access to my school email? Who had access to my personal banking? Whose address was tied to my admissions records? Did my parents claim me as a dependent? Was my father's income already baked into the aid calculation? Did anyone pressure me not to leave home? Did anyone destroy or withhold educational documents? By the time I answered the last question, the situation sounded different even to me. Less like a painful family conflict. More like interference with an adult child's educational and financial independence. Corinne took notes and then organized my options with unnerving clarity. First, remove my mother from any account where possible, or open a new one and transfer future income immediately. Second, update every institution with my aunt's address. Third, preserve every record connected to portal access, deleted messages, and public witness statements. Fourth, if my parents attempted to use my dependency status or family documents to block enrollment, challenge it early, in writing. Fifth, stop having verbal arguments where there was no paper trail. People who rely on control inside families, she said, often become careless when they think the other person still sees it as emotional. The moment you move everything into documents, they lose comfort. That sentence changed the way I behaved from then on. No more trying to be understood. only records. Within 3 days, I had a new bank account at a different branch, a new email for school correspondence, a written housing hardship request, and a signed statement from Principal Duval. Aunt Inez added a simple residency letter confirming that I lived with her. Nadine attached a counselor's statement explaining that family interference had disrupted timely response. Corinne helped me draft a short, clean declaration that omitted nothing and exaggerated nothing. The system that had been used to contain me was becoming the system that documented them. That was the structural reveal. Not one dramatic secret, but a network. Money, access, signatures, dependency, deadlines, and a family assumption that anything connected to my future still belonged partly to them. On Friday afternoon, my father finally left a voicemail. His voice was controlled, almost gentle. That was how I knew he was worried. Talia, you are overcomplicating a family disagreement. Nadine Mercer has filled your head with nonsense, and I'm hearing you've spoken to outside people. That is unnecessary. If the issue is transportation or housing, we can discuss terms at home. But if you keep creating a record that misrepresents us, you may affect your standing here more than you realize. I played it twice, then once more for Corinne. She wrote down the time and date, then said, "Good." He just acknowledged he knows there's a record. Threats become more useful when they arrive politely. That evening, I sat at Aunt Inez's table and ate tomato soup with crackers while a thunderstorm moved through town. Rain struck the windows in steady bands. My aunt was clipping coupons she rarely used. I was highlighting deadlines in the nursing packet with a borrowed pen that skipped every few lines. Nothing in the room looked triumphant. That mattered too. Real reversals do not begin with power. They begin with systems quietly shifting away from the people who thought they owned them. At 19, I still had no dorm room, no certainty, and less money than I needed. But I had something I had not had on the dock. I had structure. And once the structure changed, my family's version of events stopped being the strongest one in the room. The deeper truth arrived in pieces, and each piece made the original betrayal smaller than what it had actually been. They had not decided to stop me after the scholarship came. They had been preparing for my leaving long before I knew I had a real chance. The first sign came from a tax form. Corinne asked me to bring every financial aid document I had used for the nursing program, including copies of my father's income information from the FAFSA cycle. I spread everything across Aunt Inez's kitchen table on a Saturday morning while she peeled apples for a pie she claimed she was not baking for comfort. The forms looked ordinary. Lines, boxes, signatures. But ordinary paperwork is where families hide their real intentions. One income figure on my father's side did not match what I remembered hearing at home. Not wildly. Not enough to trigger immediate suspicion from a school office. But enough to change how need was calculated. Corinne noticed it first. She asked whether my father had received more business income that year than what appeared on the form. I said yes. He had. Beckett had bragged about a large equipment contract at dinner that winter, and my mother had spent 2 weeks talking about finally replacing the shop freezer. Corinne made one note in the margin and asked, "Who completed the aid forms?" My father said he did. "Did you review the final submission?" "No, he told me he'd handle the parent section faster than I could." She leaned back slightly. "Then this may matter." That same afternoon, Nadine pulled one more record from the school counseling file. An earlier scholarship packet I had started for a state program the fall before. It included a worksheet I had filled out using estimated household income based on the numbers my father himself had given me then. The difference was not catastrophic, but it was enough to prove something uncomfortable. He had not simply tried to keep control after my acceptance. He had been adjusting the ground under me from the application stage. Not enough to destroy my chances. Enough to limit my options. That was his style. Never the obvious blow when pressure and dependency could do the work more cleanly. The second piece came from Aunt Inez, and it was worse because it explained motive. She had dinner with my mother 6 months earlier, before my admissions results came in, when everyone still behaved as though my future was a shared topic rather than a contested one. Inez had thought little of the conversation at the time, because families say ugly things in careful voices all the time. But once she heard what happened on the dock, she remembered my mother's exact phrasing. If Talia leaves, my mother had said over chicken salad and iced tea, the whole house shifts. At first glance, that sounded emotional. A mother worried about distance, a daughter leaving home. Normal grief. But Inez remembered the rest. She handles the pharmacy runs, the church errands for your father's aunt, the books when Ronan gets behind, and half the things Beckett forgets. If she goes now, we'll be paying for help by Christmas. I sat very still while Aunt Inez repeated it. Not we'll miss her. Not she's too young. Not I'm worried about debt. We'll be paying for help. That sentence stripped the situation clean. They had not been protecting me from a mistake. They had been protecting a household economy, but Chez Boldu, and who partly on my unpaid labor and partly on my willingness to absorb Beckett's failures before they became visible. Suddenly dozens of small memories rearranged themselves. My mother insisting I stay home from study group because Beckett forgot to pick up supplies for the shop. My father calling me from work to, quickly, input invoices because Beckett was better with customers than paperwork. The way every one of my achievements was praised in private but resized in public. As if too much confidence in me might damage the balance of the family. The scholarship had threatened more than their pride. It had threatened their system. The third piece came on Monday, in a way so ordinary it would have looked insignificant to anyone else. I went back to the house when I knew my father would be at the shop and Beckett would be with him. I only wanted my winter coat and the box of childhood photos my grandmother had left me. My mother was there alone, standing at the laundry counter with a stack of folded towels. She looked tired, but not sorry. For a few minutes we spoke like strangers forced into civility by a waiting room. Then she said without preamble, "You are making everything harder than it needed to be." I set the photo box down. "For who?" "For everyone. That includes me." She gave me a look I had known all my life. The one that translated pain into inconvenience. "You had a place here. A role. Stability. Not every girl gets that. A role." I almost thanked her for saying it so plainly. Instead, I asked, "Was that why you opened my messages?" She folded another towel, smoothing the corners too carefully. "I needed time." "For what?" "To manage the transition." That phrase hung in the air between us like something from a business memo. Not stop me entirely. Manage the transition. Control the timing. Delay the departure. Keep me near until Beckett became useful enough to replace the labor I had been providing for years. It was so calculated that it no longer resembled maternal panic. It resembled resource management. I watched her hands for a second, the same hands that packed my lunches when I was 7, buttoned my coat when I was 10, and signed school forms without reading them when I was 16. Love and control had lived so close together in that house that separating them felt less like heartbreak than surgery. "You were never trying to help me choose," I said. She looked up then, and for the first time she did not defend the decision. She defended the household. "Beckett is not ready," she said. "Your father counts on continuity." Things were already strained. We could not afford for both children to be unstable at once. I let the sentence settle. Both children. One son allowed to fail repeatedly without consequence. One daughter expected to convert competence into family cushioning. That was the moral reveal. They had sacrificed my future while I still trusted them because my brother's immaturity was treated as temporary, while my reliability was treated as available. Their plan had not begun on graduation day. It had begun the moment my usefulness at home became more valuable to them than my freedom. I took my coat and the photo box and went to the front door. My mother followed me into the hall. "You think you see everything clearly now," she said. "But one day you'll understand what it takes to hold a family together." I opened the door. "No," I said. "One day you may understand what it cost to hold yours together the way you did." Outside, the air smelled like cut grass and hot pavement. A neighbor across the street was unloading groceries. Somewhere a lawnmower started up. Nothing in the world paused because a mother had finally told the truth in a quieter form. That evening I found one more thing in the photo box. Between 2 old school pictures and a birthday card from my grandmother was a folded receipt from the copy shop downtown. It was mine. I remembered printing scholarship essays there because our home printer kept jamming. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, was a note I had never seen before. "Ask Ronan if fall is too soon. Maybe spring is better." Need her here until Beckett settles. No date. No signature. No dramatic confession. Just a sentence written in the middle of ordinary errands. The way people jot down milk or batteries or dry cleaning. That was what made it devastating. My future had been reduced to scheduling. I showed it to Corinne the next morning. She slid it into a clear sleeve without comment, then looked at me and said, "This is not legally decisive by itself." "I know. But morally," she said, "it explains everything." She was right. The sabotage was no longer just about a letter, or a portal, or a missed deadline. It was about a family that had quietly decided my scholarship belonged to the household before it belonged to me. They had managed my trust while I still thought I was loved cleanly. And once I understood that, I stopped hoping for apology. From then on, I only prepared for what people do when their first plan fails. They escalated 3 weeks before orientation, and they did it the way people always do when private control begins to fail. They made me sound unstable in public. By then, my paperwork was moving again. The nursing program had approved my temporary commuter arrangement. My hardship housing request was still pending. But I had a start date, a clinical prep checklist, and a campus email account my parents could no longer touch. Corinne had helped me separate my banking. Nadine had built a clean file with every portal log, witness note, and written statement. For the first time since graduation, the path ahead looked narrow but real. That was when my father chose to widen the fight. He began with the church. Westmere was the kind of town where reputation traveled faster through folding chairs and casserole tables than through any formal channel. My family had attended the same church for years. My mother organized meal trains when someone had surgery. My father repaired broken fixtures without billing the labor. Beckett, despite rarely showing up on time, was still described as rough around the edges but good-hearted. In that ecosystem, truth did not need to win. It only needed to arrive too late. By the second Sunday in July, 3 women had already asked Aunt Inez whether I was taking a little break before deciding on school. One asked if I was feeling overwhelmed. Another told me gently that young girls sometimes mistake pressure for calling. They all used the same careful tone people use around someone they have been told is fragile. I knew immediately where it had started. Not with Beckett. He was too blunt for this. My mother had begun laying social ground. Nadine warned me this might happen. When direct access closes, she said, some families move to narrative control. She was right. 2 days later, my father left another voicemail. This one sounded less careful than the last. "I'm hearing you're still spreading this scholarship story around town. That needs to stop. You had options here. You refused them. If people think we blocked your education, that is a lie, and I won't have this family dragged through public dirt because you're emotional." I saved it without replying. Then Beckett escalated in his own way. He posted a photo from graduation on social media. Not the moment on the dock. A cropped image from earlier in the ceremony where I was holding the envelope and smiling before everything happened. The caption read, "Funny how people rewrite history when they don't get their way. Some of us stay loyal to family." The comments came exactly as he wanted. "Proud of you, man. Families sacrifice for each other. Hope your sister finds peace." No one looking at that photo would know the letter was in the river 10 minutes later. No one would see the deleted emails, the downloaded forms, the bank withdrawals, the note in my mother's handwriting. Public lies work because they travel in simple shapes. Truth usually arrives carrying folders. I did not comment. That restraint irritated Beckett more than anger would have. 2 nights later, he showed up outside Aunt Inez's duplex just after 9, engine idling at the curb, music low, headlights cutting across her small front lawn. My aunt looked through the blinds and said only, "Don't go out there alone." I went anyway, but I took my phone with me and started recording before I opened the door. Beckett was leaning against his truck like he had come to offer me a favor. His face was relaxed. His voice was not. "You really gonna drag this into school and church and legal offices?" he asked. "Over a letter? Over interference." He laughed once. "You always talk like you're in a courtroom." "No, I talk like someone who remembers." That annoyed him. I could see it in the way he shifted his weight. He stepped closer. "Dad says if you keep pushing, he'll pull every bit of support you think you have." tax forms, insurance history, anything tied to the house. You think those people helping you can fix all of that? There it was. Not concern. Pressure. I kept my voice level. Did he send you to say that? He didn't have to. That was Beckett's mistake. He always believed implied threats sounded stronger than direct ones. In reality, they reveal dependence. He had not come to solve anything. He had come because the system my parents used at home no longer reached me cleanly, and they needed an old instrument. Fear. I asked, "Why did you throw the letter?" His jaw tightened. Because someone had to make it real. Real for who? For everyone. The answer sat between us like rot finally breaking through floorboards. Not just envy, not just cruelty. He had seen my departure as a structural loss too. Maybe not in the language my parents used. But in substance, yes. If I left, Beckett would be exposed. He would have to carry more at the shop, answer for missed tasks, absorb the domestic slack I had been quietly holding for years. My scholarship was not only my opportunity, it was his inconvenience. I said, "You knew they were delaying the portal." His eyes flicked away for half a second. I knew enough. That was all I needed. Inside the house, Aunt Inez opened the front door wider, not interrupting, just making sure he could see there was a witness now. Beckett saw her silhouette and lowered his voice. "You think people are on your side?" he said. "But once Dad tells the full story, they'll understand you chose strangers over family." I almost corrected him. Nadine, Corinne, Principal Duval, my aunt. They were not strangers anymore. They were simply people who respected boundaries, which had made them unintelligible to him. Instead I said, "Leave." He stared at me for a moment, waiting for tears or pleading, or some sign that he still had the old leverage. When none came, he spat into the grass, got back into his truck, and drove off hard enough to send gravel against the curb. I went inside, stopped the recording, and emailed the audio file to myself, Corinne, and Nadine before I even sat down. That same week, my parents escalated formally. A letter arrived at the nursing program from my father's business address, stating that I did not have stable transportation, that my current living arrangement was temporary and emotionally volatile, and that any university decision relying on family financial data should be reviewed because key contextual facts had been omitted. He did not accuse me of fraud directly. He did something more dangerous. He cast doubt. Corinne read the copy we obtained through the school and gave a tight, unimpressed smile. This is what people do when they cannot disprove you. They try to make institutions nervous. The admissions office requested a meeting. That was exactly what my father wanted. A formal setting. Authority figures. A chance to reposition himself as the practical parent of a dramatic daughter. A chance to turn my evidence into misunderstanding. But structure cuts both ways. Corinne asked for the meeting to include all written submissions, with permission for me to bring counsel and a school representative. Nadine agreed to attend. Principal Duval sent an updated witness statement. Aunt Inez provided another residency letter, and a notarized note confirming my transportation plan. I submitted my new bank records, my work schedule, and the audio file from Beckett's visit. By the time the meeting was set, my father was no longer walking in as a concerned parent. He was walking into a documented dispute. Still, the pressure landed where pressure always lands first. In ordinary moments. I could feel it while folding scrubs at Aunt Inez's house, wondering whether one letter from my father could still delay the program enough to break my timing. I felt it at the grocery store when a woman from church gave me a sad smile instead of greeting me normally. I felt it when I packed my backpack for orientation and realized I had begun checking every zipper twice, as if preparation itself could prevent people from reaching into my life again. One night, Aunt Inez found me relabeling folders at the kitchen table long after midnight. "You're doing it again," she said. "What?" "Trying to control tomorrow by alphabetizing paper." I looked down at the tabs in my hand and almost smiled. She set a bowl of cut peaches beside me and sat down across from me without turning on the bright overhead light. Just the lamp near the stove. Soft yellow. Half a room. Human scale. You already did the hard part, she said. You stopped arguing with people committed to not understanding you. I ate one slice of peach and let the sweetness settle on my tongue. Outside, a train moved somewhere beyond town, low and distant. Inside, the folders stayed where I had placed them. The room did not ask me to prove anything, but the next morning would. Because my family had moved the fight exactly where they believed they were strongest into social suspicion, institutional doubt, and the old assumption that a daughter under pressure would eventually fold, rather than force her own parents to lose face in public. They still did not understand the one thing that had changed. I was no longer trying to save the relationship. I was preparing to survive its collapse in front of witnesses. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room at the nursing program offices. And by the time my father realized he was no longer controlling the story, the structure had already turned against him. He arrived early in a pressed shirt and work boots, carrying a thick leather folder meant to suggest order. My mother came in soft blue, looking composed, almost fragile. Beckett was not there. That told me my father still believed tone could win what facts had already taken from him. I sat between Corinne and Nadine. Across from us were the admissions director, a student services officer, and a program administrator. The room was quiet in the way formal rooms become when everyone already suspects where the truth is, but still wants it arranged properly. My father began exactly as expected. He called the graduation incident a family misunderstanding that had been exaggerated by emotion. He admitted Beckett had acted immaturely, but said it had nothing to do with whether I could attend school. Then he shifted to his real argument. My current living arrangement was unstable. My judgment had become reactive, and outside people had encouraged me to misread ordinary parental concern as sabotage. My mother added the softer version. She said she had only opened my messages because she was worried I did not understand the financial burden ahead. She said they had only wanted to slow things down so the family could discuss better options. Corinne did not argue. She built a record. First came the portal activity logs showing that my enrollment and housing messages had been opened from my home IP address while I was somewhere else. Then the recovered deleted emails. Then the downloaded enrollment documents from my laptop. Then the screenshot of the housing page, with the forfeiture warning highlighted. After that came Principal Duval's witness statement, Nadine's counselor letter, my aunt's residency confirmation, my new banking records, and finally the transcript of Beckett's late-night visit outside Aunt Inez's house. The transcript changed the room. Corinne placed it on the table and said, "In this conversation, the student's brother acknowledges prior knowledge of the portal interference, repeats pressure coming from the father, and describes the public destruction of the scholarship letter as something done because someone had to make it real." My father's expression did not break, but it tightened. The admissions director looked directly at him. "Mr. Reyes," she asked, "are you disputing that your son made those statements?" He paused. That pause mattered more than denial would have. He had spent his whole life answering quickly, redirecting quickly, sounding certain before anyone else could define the room. Delay made him look exposed. My mother stepped in, saying Beckett had been upset and was speaking emotionally. Corinne answered by placing my father's voicemail transcript on top of the stack, the one where he warned me against creating a record. That was the moment he lost the narrative. The questions after that became narrower. Did you access your daughter's educational correspondence without permission? Did you contact this office after her independent arrangements were approved? When you asked for a review, were you reporting false information or attempting to create doubt? My father tried to recover through practicality. He said my leaving would have created strain at home. He said family stability had to be considered. He said the household depended on continuity. The admissions director asked, "Are you saying the family's operational needs influenced your daughter's access to enrollment requirements?" He said no, but too late. The truth was already visible. They had not interfered because I was unready. They had interfered because I was useful. My mother turned to me then and tried one last emotional move. "Talia, if you had just come home and spoken to us," I answered before anyone else could. "I did. You opened my messages, deleted notices, blocked deadlines, and let Beckett throw the letter into the river." My voice stayed even. That helped more than anger would have. The room had already heard enough feeling from them. Then Nadine added one sentence that finished what needed finishing. Talia met every academic and administrative requirement until family access interfered with private communications. No speech, no embellishment, just a clean professional line. My parents were asked to step outside while the office reviewed the file. When they stood, my father forgot his folder on the table and had to turn back for it. I had never seen him make a mistake that small in public. That was how collapse begins in formal spaces. Not through drama, through loss of precision. 20 minutes later, the decision came. My enrollment would proceed without interruption. My commuter hardship arrangement was approved. I was moved to priority status for housing because of documented family interference. All future contact about my student record would be restricted to me, unless I gave written permission otherwise. My father's attempt to trigger doubt would not affect my standing. In plain terms, the institution shut them out. When my parents were called back in, the admissions director explained the result in calm, neutral language. My father interrupted once to say the school was ignoring the role parents play in supporting a child's future. The director answered, "Your daughter is the student. Our responsibility is to her." My mother said nothing after that. In the hallway outside the room, she turned to me and said quietly, "You are doing irreversible damage." I looked at her and understood with complete calm that the irreversible damage had happened on the dock. Everything since then had only documented it. "You did that," I said. Then I walked past her. By afternoon, the collapse had already started moving beyond the school. A church board member called Aunt Inez to distance the congregation from the rumors about my instability. Beckett's graduation post disappeared after people started connecting it to the real story. One of my father's pending business deals was suddenly under review. After concerns surfaced about his judgment, no one announced a punishment. That is not how social collapse works. It happens through hesitation, withdrawal, and silence where support used to be automatic. That evening, Beckett left an angry voicemail saying I had made Dad look weak and should have handled everything privately. That line told me more than the anger did. Privately meant I was supposed to absorb it quietly. Instead, the record had spoken in front of witnesses. That was the public collapse. Not because I attacked them. Because they could no longer perform innocence in a room where the documents were stronger than their voices. 6 years later, my brother stood beside that same river and tried to give a speech about loyalty. By then, I was 24, a licensed nurse, and the operations lead for a rehabilitation clinic group expanding into my hometown. My name was on staffing plans, launch approvals, and vendor recommendations. I had not returned to Westmere to settle anything with my family. I was there because our group was sponsoring a community fundraiser at the renovated dock and announcing a scholarship for students facing barriers to educational access. The river looked almost unchanged. That was what made the evening feel precise. My father's shop had hoped to win part of the new center's service work. Beckett had been invited to speak during the program about family business values and staying rooted in the community. He wore a sport coat that did not fit well, and the same confidence he had worn on the dock years earlier. My parents were both there. So were former teachers, church members, local business owners, Nadine and Aunt Inez. I arrived quietly, with a printed badge, a dark dress, and the kind of calm that does not need introduction. The event chair greeted me by name. So did the board liaison and the hospital administrator partnering on the new center. That was enough for my mother to understand something had shifted before a word was spoken. My father approached first. "What exactly is your role here?" he asked. "Operational review," I said. It was the simplest true answer, and it landed harder than explanation would have. The program began. Donors were thanked. A school choir sang. Then Beckett went to the podium and started talking about sacrifice, staying loyal, and how some people leave town chasing ambition while others stay and carry the weight. He even gestured toward the river while he said it. "Families survive," he said, "because some of us understand loyalty matters more than ambition." There are sentences that sound safe until they land in front of the wrong record. A few rows away, the board liaison turned slightly toward me. Nadine lowered her program. Aunt Inez did not move at all. When Beckett finished, The moderator thanked him and moved to the final sponsor acknowledgement. Our last recognition tonight comes from the clinical development team behind the Northridge Recovery Center and its new Allied Health Access Scholarship, she said. Representing the operations group is Miss Talia Reyes. The room sharpened. I walked to the stage while people recalculated in real time. I thanked the committee, the hospital, and the donors. Then I spoke briefly about rural access, training gaps, transportation, housing, and the hidden ways opportunity can be blocked before it is ever formally denied. Then I said, "This scholarship is designed for students whose path is made harder by interference, family pressure, or lack of structural support. Talent is not always what fails. Sometimes access fails first." My mother went still. I did not look at her again. The moderator stepped forward with the final announcements. Launch vendors for the new center. Refrigeration support. Facilities service. Supply maintenance. Every contract my father had quietly hoped might steady the business went elsewhere. That was the financial collapse. Not dramatic. Administrative. My father did not protest. He just sat there while the numbers closed around him. After the program, the hospital administrator spoke with me about the staffing pipeline. Donors asked about the scholarship rollout. A church board member who had once heard rumors about my instability now congratulated me in a careful voice. One of Beckett's old friends came to shake my hand and avoided his side of the room entirely. That was the social collapse. Not noise. Alignment changing direction. Beckett reached me near the sponsor table while volunteers were stacking programs. "You set this up," he said. "The project was reviewed for months," I answered. "You knew I was speaking." "Yes." "And you still came." "Yes." He stared at me, waiting for some admission that the night had been about him. It wasn't. That was the part he could not bear. "You just wanted everyone to see this," he said. He meant the title on my badge. The scholarship, the contracts, the fact that the same river he had used to humiliate me had become the backdrop to his own irrelevance. "No," I said. "I wanted the project handled correctly." That finished him more cleanly than anger would have. My father came over a few minutes later, slower and more careful. "You could have warned us," he said. I thought of the deleted messages, the portal deadlines, the note in my mother's handwriting, and the sentence Beckett had let slip in the kitchen years earlier. Once the housing was gone, I would fold. "I wasn't required to," I said. That was the emotional shift. Not apology, not reconciliation, recognition. He finally understood that I no longer organized my choices around protecting them. My mother never approached. She stood near the exit, speaking quietly with a woman from church who kept glancing toward me with the look people wear when a long-defended story no longer holds. Near the scholarship display, a teenage girl was reading the eligibility criteria line by line while her mother stood beside her. That mattered more to me than anything my family felt that night. Later, when the crowd had thinned, Aunt Inez came to stand beside me at the railing. Nadine joined us a minute later. Below us, the river moved under the dock lights with the same indifferent rhythm it had carried 6 years before. Back then it had taken my letter. Now it stood beside a scholarship built for people whose futures might otherwise be quietly managed by those closest to them. What they had nearly taken had not simply been restored. It had been turned into protection for someone else. Nadine looked out at the water and said, "They probably still think this was revenge." I shook my head. It wasn't revenge. Revenge would have needed a speech. This was structure. The contracts had spoken. The scholarship had spoken. The room had seen who was trusted with the future and who was no longer part of its decisions. I did not argue with my parents that night. I did not ask Beckett for regret. I did not need a confession. The system had already answered for me. When I finally walked away from the river, the printed scholarship program was folded in my hand. One line was in bold: priority consideration for students facing documented barriers to educational access. Once my family had tried to reduce my future to labor, timing, and permission. Now the very kind of interference they used had become part of a structure designed to stop it from happening again. I slipped the program into my bag and walked to the parking lot with Aunt Inez and Nadine beside me. No one called me back. They did not need to. I was never the one who had to stay to make that family stand. I was the part they depended on while pretending I was replaceable. And in the end, the structure told the truth for me.